France, June 6, 1944. A wounded P-51 slips out of the clouds like a silver falcon with a torn wing, its Merlin breathing in ragged bursts, a thread of smoke tracing its fall. It schemes hedgerows, claws a last gasp of lift, then folds into the earth. The pilot survives the violence. The airplane does something stranger. It lives on, behind enemy lines. German recovery crews are already a machine within the machine of occupation. They arrive with checklists, trucks, cables, quiet competence. The Mustang is bruised, but not broken. Straight enough, promising enough to be worth the trouble. They cradle it onto a flatbed like a stolen secret and vanish toward the heart of the Reich. Rechlin, Germany's nerve center for testing. The American fighter is laid open like a book. Wings off, panels off. The black-green of foreign engineering under bright lamps. No manduas, no spare parts, no problem. Technicians cannibalize from other wrecks, fabricate where they must, and coax a foreign heart to beat again. When the Mustang reappears, it's a chameleon. Balkenkreuz on the flanks. T9 plus HK scrawled where an American serial once sat. A splash of bright RLM-04 yellow along the undersides and tail, spinner tipped like a warning flare. To a German eye at altitude, that yellow screams, friend. To history, it whispers, irony. They roll it to the line. A test pilot straps in and meets a cockpit designed by people who care deeply about a pilot's hands. The instruments speak in a clear, American grammar. Switches sit where instinct wants them. The seat feels like it was made for hours, not minutes. He closes the hood, runs the check, and feeds in power. The Packard-built Merlin doesn't surge. It gathers the airplane with a smooth, accelerating push that feels like competence made mechanical. The Hamilton standard bites, and the runway shrinks. Air becomes lift, lift becomes possibility. The first German impressions are not ideological. They are tactile. The stick is honest. The ailerons are alive. The rudder answers without sulking. The airplane moves when told, not when negotiated. Speed, that's the first revelation. The Mustang walks away from expectation. At altitude, it still has lungs, where single-stage rivals grow short of breath. The two-stage supercharger keeps shoveling air uphill, and the horizon comes faster. Then the roll rate, crisp, confident, a metronome you can set tactics by. Dive it, and the controls don't petrify. Pull through, and the wings feel carved for the slipstream. It doesn't buck, it doesn't whine, it just works. Turn with a Bf-109, and you'll feel that German slat have their say. But the Mustang doesn't ask to play that game. Energy is its native language. Up into the vertical, back down in a scythe. Trade altitude for speed and speed for position with a banker's discipline. Engage when it's to your advantage. Decline when it's not. The pilot isn't trapped in a duel. He's writing it. And then, range. The word that makes briefings go quiet. Internal fuel first, then the plump drop tanks under each wing, and suddenly escort means all the way there and all the way back. Not just to the border. Not just until the bombers need you most. All the way deep into Germany. Deep enough that old German tactics become old German stories told with a sigh. Rosarius, Theodore Rosarius, understands exactly what this means. He builds something unsettlingly smart. A traveling circus of captured aircraft, flown by German test pilots, maintained by German mechanics, toured through German fighter fields. The Wanderzirkus Rosarius is a show with teeth. The Mustang is its star. Imagine the first time it taxis past a line of Bf-109s and FW-190s. Listen to the conversations die mid-sentence. German markings on an American shape. Yellow tail. Familiar in silhouette, unfamiliar in allegiance. The crowd pulls closer, morbidly curious. The show begins, low level fast. A pass so quick that heads turn late. A climb that looks drawn with a ruler up the sky. Aileron rolls, so clean they feel like a tutorial in aerodynamics. Then the mock fights. A German pilot in a home field fighter versus a German pilot in a foreign machine. The result is not a propaganda poster. It is a masterclass in physics. When a Mustang wants to leave, it leaves. When it wants the high ground, it takes it. When pressed into a turn, it says, "No thanks," and buys space with speed. The message seeps in through the eyes, the hands, the stomach. It's not that German fighters can't win. It's that the fight is now uphill in more ways than one. After the landing, pilots swarm the airplane. They lean into the cockpit. They trace the ergonomic logic with a fingertip. Fuel selector here, trims where they should be, instruments grouped by what a brain uses together. They ask about cooling, about compressibility, about fuel management with those long-legged tanks. They want tricks. There aren't tricks. There is design. Inside workshops at Rechlin and Göttingen, engineers go further. They weigh. They measure. They disassemble. They note consistent materials that speak of a country not starving for alloy. They note access panels that turn maintenance from penance into procedure. They note the wing, laminar flow in theory, lower drag in practice, and enough efficiency to make 8 hours a number fighters were not built to understand. Meanwhile, on the line, another truth bites. Fuel in Germany is gold leaf on water. Training time shrivels. Young pilots arrive with courage, poor instrument habits, and too few hours to build judgment. Veterans rotate through the circus, nodding grimly at what they already learned the hard way. Tactics adapt, but the sky remains the sky, a place where speed is mercy and range is strategy. The Mustang's strengths line up exactly where the war has gone. High altitude, long legs, speed enough to choose yes or no. Bomber streams now come with shepherds who don't turn back when targets get ugly. German interceptors can't simply wait anymore. They must punch through escorts who are still fresh when the fighting starts, and still there when the fighting ought to be over. In the hangar's harsh light, a German mechanic steals a knuckle on an American fastener and mutters a compliment that would have been unthinkable 2 years earlier. The test pilot signs a form that says nothing about morale and everything about performance. The demonstration team packs up the circus and moves on to another field. A briefing officer tries to square the circle. "You can beat it if," he says, Chalk squeaking out a tactic that depends on surprises rarer by the day. The pilots glance at the door, already hearing the rumble of the visiting aircraft. The best of them keep listening. A lesson is a chance to live. On the runway, T9 plus HK catches sunlight. You could call it betrayal in paint. You could call it realism in yellow. When it lifts off, the sound is the same one Allied pilots love and German pilots have learned to respect: a refined, relentless surge. It's not the angry bark of a radial. It's not the brittle thrill of a jet. It is the hum of a machine built to spend hours turning advantage into survival. A mock engagement begins. The German in the Mustang climbs, brakes, extends. The German in the 109 presses, then watches the distance open. He angles for altitude, but the other airplane blooms higher first, angles down, and is suddenly behind him. He tightens turn, feels the slats whisper out at the edge, rides the buffet, and gets a moment of hope until the Mustang refuses the turn, takes the vertical again, and rewrites the geometry. Afterward, on the ground, nobody shrugs this off. The conclusions are carved into the day. Don't fight it slow and level. Don't chase it in a straight line. Catch it by surprise, or catch it never. Try from above. Try to make it defensive before it wants to be. Try, and accept that sometimes try is a plan for dying slower. Numbers start to tell their own story, numbers that aren't rumors anymore. Hundreds of Mustangs a month rolling off lines that look more like cities than factories, quality so uniform that a pilot can trust any airplane assigned to him. Radios that work. Instruments that hold calibration, spares that exist, manuals that are written for mechanics rather than for saints. German advancements keep coming. Long-nosed Doris, high-altitude dreams called Ta-152, meteors with names like Me-262 that promise to outrun everything and often do. On the days they start, on the runways that haven't been cratered yet, with fuel that tastes like compromise. Brilliance isn't the problem. Logistics is. And logistics, like gravity, does not negotiate. Back in the circus, the Mustang accumulates fingerprints and fighter pilot folklore. Pilots argue over the perfect climb speed, the best moment to jettison tanks, the split second when extend becomes re-engage. The airplane doesn't join the argument. It just keeps being itself that on a cold December day, the story of T9 plus HK blurs at the edges. Some say it went down in a demonstration. Some say a raid found it on the ground. Some say it simply ran out of luck in a war that had already sold out of grace. What is certain is that by then, it had taught hundreds of men lessons that would save some lives and haunt many others, strip away the paint. And the Mustang that toured German bases is the same machine that left English soil to watch over bombers and bring comrades home. It is an idea expressed in metal. Prioritize range, prioritize speed, make it friendly to the hands that must master it, and accept that winning a war isn't about the best turn at 3,000 meters on a sunny day. It's about being there at the right place and time, again and again, until right place and time belongs to you. The Wanderzirkus Rosarius proved something vital. Even in losing, you can learn the truth with rigor. You can take an enemy's strength, put your own men in its seat, and tell them, this is what you will face. This is where it's strong. This is where, if the stars align and you're smart and lucky, it yields. It was not a cure for the disease that ate the Luftwaffe, but it was an honest diagnosis, and perhaps that's why the story still stings. 4 German pilots. The Mustang was both a teacher and a verdict. For Allied crews, it was a promise kept at altitude. For us, it is a case study in how design shapes destiny, how ergonomics steal minutes of endurance from fatigue, how a supercharger buys you 1,000 meters of hope, how a wing that wastes less makes history. Let me turn it over to you. If you climbed into that cockpit, American star or German cross on the skin, what would you want to know before wheels up? Would you try to outthink it, outclimb it, or refuse it until the fight was yours? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Tell me what you would ask the test pilots who flew both sides of the mirror. If this journey through a captured Mustang and the circus that revealed it pulled you in, tap like so others can find it, and subscribe for more deep dives into the hidden corners of World War II. Your comments feed the next episode, so make them sharp, make them bold, and I'll see you in the skies above the next story. Elsewhere, a different airfield, a different crowd, the same uneasy curiosity. The traveling team rolls in like a small carnival. Trucks, crates, a ground crew with practiced hands, pilots with notebooks full of performance cards and caution lines. They unpack the foreign fighter, and a hush runs along the flight line. It's still an enemy airplane. It just happens to be teaching today. They call the outfit a circus for a reason. The show is portable, repeatable, ruthless in its attention to what matters. Walk around first. Understand the machine with your eyes. Then cockpit familiarization. Understand it with your hands. Then the flying. Understand it with your gut. And finally, the debrief. Understand what it will do to you if you make a mistake. German squadron leaders take turns in the right place at the right time. The briefing hut with a chalkboard and a bad heater. They sketch profiles of bomber streams, draw arcs of climb and dive, and annotate them with new numbers learned from the visitor. Speeds to avoid, angles to prefer. The Mustang is not impossible, they say. It's just unforgiving if you grant it the fight it wants at 18 Ruppen. The lesson spreads to allies. Hungarian pilots gather under the yellowed map and listen to tactics tailored for their FW-190s. Stay out of slow flats, hit from above, don't chase in a straight line, and never be seduced by the idea that a turning duel is noble. Noble is expensive. Energy is cheap if you plan for it. The airplanes were tidy codes that look official until you chase the paperwork. T9 plus HK. T9 plus CK. The Circus uses a letter soup that doesn't belong to any standard formation because the Circus itself doesn't fit in a manual. And then there are the ghosts, codes misremembered, misfiled, misattributed over time. T9 plus FK turns out to be a Thunderbolt in German paint, not a Mustang at all. T9 plus PK, a captured Soviet fighter wearing the same traveling costume. History is precise until it isn't. Back at Rechlin and in the labs at Göttingen, engineers perform a different kind of flight, down into the fine print of design. They slice open a wing and admire the grammar of its spars. The laminar flow dream doesn't survive every rivet and streak of paint, but drag is still low and range is still outrageous. They trace coolant lines, oil lines, fuel lines, and admire how often the shortest path also turns out to be the smartest. They weigh access panels in their palms and think about a mechanic in rain at midnight. How quickly can he reach the thing that failed? Set the Packard-built Merlin on a stand, and it tells another story. Not just power, reproducible power. Two-stage supercharging that isn't just clever on paper, is a ticket to where the bombers live at 25,000 to 30,000 feet. American factories build this complexity by the thousands with a sameness that feels like luxury to men who have learned to doubt late war spares. Quality control isn't a slogan. It is the difference between an engine that climbs like a promise and one that coughs at the edge of its map. Now put all of that back inside the story that matters. Pilots. Every advantage only exists if a human can use it under fear. The cockpit makes that easier. Gauges grouped by what a decision needs. Controls that don't ask for heroics at the end of a long mission. A seat that doesn't punish a spine over hours. The difference between good and great sometimes begins with the moment a tired brain can still find a fuel selector without looking. Contrast sharpens the picture. On the German side, fuel is rationed like hope. Sorties. Training syllabi pinched down to the bone. Instrument time becomes a rumor. Young men fly into weather with courage that can't read a needle. Veterans carry 3 wars in one. The one in the air, the one for maintenance on the ground, the one against arithmetic in the factories. Production itself becomes a battlefield with different rules. The Americans pour Mustangs into squadrons at a monthly rate that reads like misprint on German forms. Radios arrive that simply work. Instruments that simply hold calibration. Manuals that teach without ambiguity. Spare parts that are spare parts, not compromises pretending. The airplane that shows up on Monday behaves like the one you flew on Friday. A pilot can build muscle memory on that kind of reliability. The Circus does not flinch from hard truths. It stages mock fights that don't flatter anyone. A 109, with its high-lift slats deployed, can carve a tighter slow circle. A 190 can make a diving pass look like a guillotine if it starts high and fast. But the Mustang keeps rewriting geometry. It refuses to be pinned in the regime where it is weakest. It buys altitude with speed and then buys position with altitude. It does not chase, it corrals. It does not linger. It dictates that on a sour weather day, the demonstration takes place under a ceiling low enough to make even the brave respectful. The visiting pilot keeps it sensible, but the message lands anyway. Control harmony stays intact where others get heavy and reluctant. The airplane feels like a tool that keeps its edge when the conditions dull everything else. In the debrief, a veteran with a scar on his jaw taps the board and says, "If you must turn with it, make sure it's the turn you chose." In the hangars, mechanics find reasons to envy their opposite numbers. Cowling pieces that hinge and disappear out of the way, rather than demanding an afternoon of contortions. Electrical looms that are labeled and logical. Filters and pumps positioned as if the designer expected hands with gloves and not prayers. The speed of a turnaround is strategy in disguise. The Mustang seems built by people who knew that. Not every lesson lifts spirits. Some demoralize because they are honest. The escorts no longer peel away just when the mission reaches its ugliest moment. They're still there, fresh enough to fight. The old trick of timing an interception to the escort's fuel state becomes a story to tell to new pilots. We used to wait. You cannot. And the attrition curve has its own cruel momentum. When experience is irreplaceable and time is short, curves become cliffs. Yet curiosity, that stubborn human trait, still blooms. German test pilots who have flown everything with a propeller grow quietly respectful. They leave propaganda outside the cockpit. They talk about control feedback like a musician would talk about a good instrument. How it tells you what it needs without shouting. How it forgives without going soft. How it stays with you when you push. Meanwhile, in another corner of the war, jets appear at the edge of the frame like messengers from the future. The Me-262 is pure velocity, when fuel is present, when engines behave, when runways survive the morning. It proves that leapfrogging is possible in theory. In practice, it is a handful of swords against an ocean. The Circus acknowledges it, admires it, and returns to today's problem: bombers with guardians that do not go home early. The Mustang's touring life accumulates rumors as fast as signatures in logbooks. Some say a particular airframe once outclimbed every fighter it met at a base near the coast. Some say its yellow tail saved it from blue on blue more than once. Some say the demo pilot could make it do a slow roll so axial that men on the ground swore the horizon rolled instead. Stories grow in the telling, but underneath them sits a core of repeatable truth. The airplane's strengths are not situational. They're systemic. When the Circus visits a hard-hit unit, the reception is different. The faces are more lined, the questions more specific. What's the best speed to separate when you're low on gas? How much altitude do you need to be safe in a vertical extension? What happens if you jettison one tank and forget the other? The test pilot answers with numbers and habits. He does not promise salvation. He promises options. On some days, that is enough. December closes in. Snow makes the airplanes look delicate. The cold leaches noise out of the world. On the flight line, T9 plus HK doesn't know it's near the end of its story. Airplanes never do. Humans give them fates. Machines give us results. Whether it is lost in a demonstration or smashed on the ground by a raid or simply retired into the fog of a collapsing front, the result is the same. The lessons remain after the paint burns. What do the lessons add up to? That a fighter can be more than the sum of speed, climb, and turn charts. It can be a design that anticipates how people fail, tired, afraid, overloaded, and helps them fail less. It can be a strategy poured into aluminum. Carry fuel without apology, manage heat with elegance, preserve control feel at the edges, and insist on reliability like it's a weapon. Because it is that IT also adds up to something harsh. You can be brave, brilliant, and doomed if the other side can build faster, train longer, and show up everywhere. The Circus is proof that the Luftwaffe did not lack for professionalism, for curiosity, for the will to learn from an enemy. It lacked time, fuel, and the elasticity of an industrial base that could absorb blows and still accelerate. And so we come back to the image that opened our story: a Mustang falling out of a broken sky into a field it was not meant to touch, and then being resurrected to teach the men who were supposed to kill it. A machine crossed a line on a map and became a mirror. Pilots looked into it and saw futures, some survivable, some not. If you've flown with me this far, here's your turn to take the stick. Which detail changed your mind most? The comfortable cockpit that makes better pilots, the supercharger that makes thin air harmless, the wing that turns fuel into reach, or the way tactics bend around energy like steel around a magnet? Tell me in the comments which moment from the Circus you want to witness firsthand, or which myth about the Mustang you want me to test in a future episode. If this deep dive kept you watching, hit like so this story climbs the algorithm the way the Mustang climbed in a thin blue. Subscribe to the channel for more warbode seen from unexpected angles. And drop your toughest questions below. Your comments are the fuel tanks that let this series go long. Picture a winter morning where the sky is the color of unpolished steel. The Circus arrives to a base that has buried too many friends. The crew unloads in a choreography that looks almost gentle. Canvas off, chocks down, fuel bozers creeping like beetles. The yellow tail catches a blink of sun, and every head turns. Today's lesson is not theory. It has a propeller and a heartbeat. Briefing, then hands-on. A young pilot climbs the ladder and settles into the foreign cockpit. He expects clutter. He finds order. He expects to search. He finds what he needs on instinct. Throttle, trim, coolant, fuel, each where a tired brain will look first. He glances at the sight that won't be used, at guns that have been replaced with ballast, and understands this is a classroom disguised as a fighter up there. The demonstration is a sermon in physics. Acceleration that is patient and irresistible. Climb that feels like a check cashed. Roll that answers like a well-made hinge. In the vertical, the Mustang writes cursive arcs of advantage. In the dive, it keeps its nerve where others go heavy. Forced into a slow, flat turn, it simply refuses the invitation. Extend, reset, return with the cards stacked on the ground. The debrief is as blunt as war. Don't fight where it is strong. Don't chase straight, or you'll die tired. Strike from above. Leave before greed writes your name on a report. If it starts to run, it will finish. If it starts to climb, it will arrive first. If you must turn, make it the turn you chose, not the turn it sold you. Engineers peel back layers in the hangar and discover why the airplane feels the way it does. Drag saved in dozens of small decisions. Cooling routed with the logic of experience. Service panels that turn midnight maintenance into minutes, not hours. Not perfection. War never offers that, but a relentless bias toward practicality. It's not just fast, it's understandable. It's not just long-legged, it's easy to keep ready. And then the hard arithmetic knocks on the door. Fuel scarce. Training time thinner than the air at altitude. A generation of pilots sent to fight with courage and a deficit of hours. Opposite them, crews arriving in machines that behave the same on Monday as they did on Friday, with radios that hold a tune and gauges that mean what they say. One side fights the enemy. The other fights the enemy and the supply chain. Guess which one has energy left for tactics. The circus keeps moving. New base, same ritual. Walk around, cockpit, flight, debrief. At New Rupin, allies crowd in. Hungarian pilots tracing attack profiles on paper with calloused fingers. High fast, one pass out. Don't be tempted. A lesson in sentences short enough to remember when the canopy is loud. Codes on the capture machines make clerks happy and historians miserable. T9 plus HK. T9 plus CK. Others that sound right, but belong to different airframes entirely. Misreads become myths. Paper trails break where bombs fell. What survives is not paperwork, it's patterns. The Mustang's pattern is simple. Choose the fight or leave it. Inside labs at Göttingen and workshops at Rechlin, the airplane becomes a set of conclusions. Materials that say no shortage. Tolerances that say built the same again and again. A wing that may not deliver perfect laminar flow in the wild, but still wastes less air than most rivals. A two-stage supercharger that makes thin sky feel thick enough to use. Add it up, and you get more than performance numbers. You get time. Time over target. Time to escort. Time to decide that I and the squadrons, the cultural shift is visible in little things. Briefings talk less about bravery and more about geometry. Veterans correct new arrivals who want to turn for honor instead of climb for survival. The old tactic, wait for escorts to hit bingo and go home, becomes a story that begins with "we used to" and ends with a shrug. The window is shut. The fight is now, with guardians that don't leave, jets thunder into the narrative like spoilers from tomorrow. When a Me-262 works, it is a problem nobody can ignore. But the circus remains focused on the war most people are actually fighting. Props versus props at altitudes where the cold gets into your bones and the formations look like cities. The jet proves brilliance. The Mustang proves availability. Strategy prefers the second. Late in the year, the demonstrations grow fewer. Fuel is rationed to the point of ritual. Runways double as targets. The yellow-tailed Mustang that taught so many lessons, T9 plus HK, vanishes into one of several endings. A mishap in practice, a crater from a raid, or simply the bureaucratic silence of a collapsing front. Airplanes don't get epilogues. People do. Ask the men who flew both sides of the mirror what stayed with them. Most won't talk about propaganda. They'll talk about how an aircraft felt at the edge of stall, whether the stick grew heavy at speed, whether the climb still had meat left above 25,000, whether the engine would start after a cold soak without a prayer. They will talk about the sort of design that forgives fatigue and punishes arrogance. Step back, and a larger shape of the story emerges. The Mustang wasn't designed to win airshow duels at treetop speed. It was designed to escort bombers deep, fight high, stay long, and give its pilot a cockpit that made discipline easy under pressure. That is not romance. That is logistics in the language of aerodynamics. The Circus, for its part, is proof that professional curiosity can coexist with desperation. It didn't save the Luftwaffe. It did, however, turn rumor into data. It let pilots put hands on what they feared and learn how not to die to it quite so quickly. In a different war, with more fuel, more time, fewer craters, maybe those lessons would have had room to compound. In this war, they were a thin edge held against the tide. Now, you're turned away in. Which part of this traveling classroom surprised you the most? The cockpit that thinks like a pilot, the engine that breathes where others pant, the wing that buys hours, or the tactics that treat patience as a weapon? Drop your take in the comments. Tell me which captured aircraft you want next in the series. The Thunderbolt in German colors, the Lightning under the wrong flag, or the day a 4-engine giant parked beside its enemies. If this chapter kept you locked in until the end, hit like so it reaches the people who love this history the way you do, and subscribe for more front row seats to the strangest corners of World War II. Your questions shape the next deep dive, so fire away below, and I'll build the next mission around them. B. Why late autumn? The Circus has perfected its rhythm. A convoy noses through frostbitten roads, the crew moving like a pit team that knows every bolt by name. At each stop, the same ritual unfolds, and yet every crowd reacts as if witnessing a magic trick. An American thoroughbred wearing German marks, idling with an even, assured thrum. The sound unknots preconceptions faster than any lecture. Watch a senior flight leader step up first. He doesn't grin, doesn't scowl, just studies. He runs his palm along the leading edge, taps the rivet lines, squints at the radiator scoop like a man reading a clever paragraph. In the cockpit, he rests his hand on the throttle and closes his eyes for a heartbeat, mapping reach and sequence. Mixture, prop, boost, trim. You can feel the moment he chooses to respect the machine instead of dismissing it. The flight is restrained at first, all measured inputs and clean profiles. Then, like a pianist stretching into tempo, he explores the edges, a snappier roll, a steeper climb, a longer push in a thin air that would have shamed many fighters into breathlessness. Back down over the field, he drags a line of sound that ripples jackets and rattles windows. When he lands, he doesn't make a speech. He simply says, "You will not catch it if it has decided to leave," and points to the board. That board becomes a battlefield of chalk. Altitude bands, entry speeds, brake cues, never and only if underlined until the chalk stubs. The lesson is oddly humble for a war story. Don't prove bravery, prove geometry. Use height as a wallet. Spend speed like currency. Accept that choosing to fight is victory before guns ever speak. In private, pilots talk about feel. How the stick loads, yet still communicates at speed. How the rudder has enough authority to tidy the nose without wrestling. How the airplane tells you when lift is thinning, not with panic, but with warnings you can learn to hear. A good airplane whispers early. A great one whispers early and keeps whispering when the world gets loud. The mechanics find their own gospel. Cowls that open in sensible sections. Filters that can be swapped in the time it takes to tell a joke. Safety wire that actually lines up with human hands. They argue about machining quality, about the neatness of looms, about the way the fuel system lets you manage risk instead of suffer it. In their world, predictability is courage. Mock engagements become the language everyone speaks. A 190 diving from the gods can threaten, yes, but if it misses and tries to stay, the Mustang converts height back into motion, resets, and turns the next pass into a trap. A 109 carving a tight circle can briefly write hope on the sky. But if the Mustang pilot refuses the circle, climbs, and comes back with gravity on his side, the hope goes thin. The pattern repeats, not because the pilots lack imagination, but because physics rewards the same habits. When the Circus reaches a coastal base, the weather makes the lesson harsher. Low ceiling, crosswind with a knife in it. The visitor flies anyway, within limits that respect fate. Even constrained, the story tells itself. The controls still harmonize, The engine still has breath. The aircraft still finds a dignified exit from bad options. On the ground, a young pilot, eyes red from too many funerals, raises a hand. What do I do when it starts to run? The answer never changes. Break contact early. Take altitude. Make it come back on your terms, or let it go. Pride is a bill you can't pay twice. The paper trail of the circus remains as messy as wartime paper trails get. Codes like T9 plus HK and T9 plus CK anchor memories to metal. Other codes wander across stories they never belonged to. Thunderbolts misnamed as Mustangs. Soviet fighters wearing borrowed letters. The archivists of the future will curse the chaos. The men of the present care about what repeats, not what's perfectly filed, in laboratories. The Mustang becomes data. A wing that cheats drag enough to turn gallons into hours. A supercharger that lets strategy live where oxygen is scarce. Systems placed where tired hands can find them. The result is more than numbers. It is endurance of machines, of pilots, of missions that no longer need a window of escortlessness to succeed. This endurance changes the bomber war in ways felt at kitchen tables far from the front. Targets that used to be sanctuaries at certain hours are now reachable with guardians intact. German fighters that once timed their courage to the escort's fuel now find guardians still circling, still ready. The narrative pivot is ruthless. Interception becomes an exercise in surviving the escort long enough to even begin on the bombers, and often it doesn't begin. Not that German innovation goes silent. Long-nosed Doris Prowl, elegant and dangerous in the band where they shine. A high-altitude specialist appears with a wingspan like ambition. Jets carve their signatures across the future. But innovation needs fuel, time, and room to breathe. The circus keeps showing up, and the arithmetic keeps saying no. Between demonstrations, there's a quieter front. The debrief tents where pilots trade micro-lessons. Don't let him sell you the horizontal. 2 seconds more patience on the trigger, or you'll overshoot the chance. Jettison both tanks, or your roll gets lopsided when you need it clean. These are small pieces of wisdom, the kind that put lives on the right side of a margin point one afternoon. A veteran who has flown too much and survived too often watches the Mustang taxi in, that yellow tail bright against a bruised sky. He doesn't applaud. He doesn't sneer. He simply says to the younger pilots, believe what you saw, not what you were told last year. It is not defeatism. It is professionalism. The first step in adapting to a reality that does not ask permission as winter hardens. The circus loses momentum to scarcity. Airfields become targets more than bases. Fuel trucks arrive light or not at all. The schedule collapses into what can be done today. Somewhere amid those shrinking circles, the Mustang that taught so many lessons disappears into the fog of war. The details are less important than the residue. 1,000 small course corrections across units that saw the show and adjusted something, however modest, toward survival. Step back, and the outline of the story is stark. The Mustang's genius isn't a single record-setting statistic. It's the way a cluster of decisions, range, altitude performance, pilot workload, maintainability, align with the strategy the Allies need. It's an aircraft that doesn't just win duels, it shapes days. It doesn't just chase victories, it denies opportunities. It is design enforcing doctrine at scale. And the circus? It proves that you can tell the truth even when the truth hurts. That a demonstration can be a weapon, not to kill, but to correct. That a pilot who has touched an enemy cockpit and felt its logic is better armored than one who has only heard rumors. In a gentler world, that lesson would be enough. In this one, it buys time, not miracles. Now it's your turn to weigh in. If you stood on that frozen ramp and watched the yellow-tailed Mustang carve a line across the field, what question would you shout to the demo pilot as he pulled the canopy back? Would you ask about climb cues, vertical merges, fuel management, or the one mistake he sees most often? Tell me in the comments what you'd want tested next. The Thunderbolt's dive advantage under German hands, the Lightning's twin-engine tactics when painted in the wrong colors, or a head-to-head energy dual measured by stopwatch and altimeter. If this chapter kept you hooked, tap like so it reaches more history nerds like us. and subscribe to stay strapped in for the next deep dive. Your questions or the flight plan? Drop them below, and I'll build the next sortie around what you want to see proven in the sky. Snow clings to the edges of the runway like white tape on a prize fight ring. The traveling team coaxes the Mustang to life, and the engine answers with a sound that feels less like noise and more like intent. A crowd forms, wool coats, leather helmets, hands jammed deep against the cold, and the demonstration begins with the simplest truth of all. This airplane wastes very little. Up in the pattern, the pilot draws diagrams the eye can follow. A flat pass, speed obvious even to the untrained. A climbing spiral, height bought at a rate that unnerves anyone used to single-stage breath. A quick series of rolls. No wobble, no bargaining, just a clean axis like a gymnast who knows the routine by heart. When he lands, the smell of warm metal says as much as any debrief. Inside the drafty briefing room, chalk finds its authority. If you meet at level and linger, you're already negotiating from weakness. Lines of attack form on the board. Start high, convert height to a short, violent pass, and leave before the fight turns into a debate the Mustang will win. Somebody asks about chasing. The answer is gentle and final. Don't. A mechanic who has watched too many dawns without enough sleep gives his verdict in plain language. It opens where you wish yours did. It closes where you wish yours wouldn't. He points at a hinge, a filter, a safety latch that saves 10 minutes each time. 10 minutes on a cold morning becomes hours across a week. Hours become sorties. Sorties become outcomes. By midday, the circus adds a twist, a mock escort scenario. A gaggle of bombers represented by marked areas in the sky. German fighters tasked to punch through, the captured Mustang playing shepherd. The result is a lesson in frustration. Each time an attacker lines up, the shepherd appears, fast enough to spoil timing, present enough to drain nerve. Not invincible, merely unavoidable. Later, a veteran with a voice like gravel offers something the room doesn't want but needs. There's no trick here. It's not magic. It's arithmetic that flies. He taps the column where range lives, where speed lives, where high-altitude power lives, and the column where training hours used to live at T another base. The circus brings along a different prize, a heavy bomber in foreign colors, parked like a barn with wings. Crews crawl through it, gun positions, cables, walkways, while the Mustang circles overhead like a warning. Interception plans are drawn with renewed realism. All roads now pass guarded gates in the labs. Engineers write reports that read like autopsies on the myth of parity. They measure control forces, chart cooling margins, document climb rate by the 1,000-foot stare. The numbers don't gloat, they accumulate. Laminar ideals may blur in service life, but drag is still low. The supercharger may add weight and complexity, but thin air still feels thick enough to fight in. Add fuel, and the map itself changes shape. Stories spread the way stories do. One says a demonstration pilot outrolled a 190 in the first quarter turn and then refused the rest of the fight, climbing away like he was tied to a winch. Another swears a 109 almost had him in a sustained turn until the Mustang flattened, extended, and returned from above with the sort of inevitability that makes a man quiet. Exaggerations live in these tales, but so do fingerprints of truth. The codes stamped on fuselages turn archival work into guesswork, yet among the muddled letters a pattern stays clean. The circus chooses the strongest hook in the Allied toolbox, then forces everyone to hang from it for a while. Some come down with new tactics. Some come down with new doubts. Most come down with both. Fuel grows so scarce that flight time is rationed like morphine. The circus adapts. More ground school, more cockpit time without takeoff, more standardized cards to put in a pocket, entry speeds, climb schedules, do this, not that. Pilots rehearse with hands, not engines. When the air clears enough to fly, they get one pass at learning before the day's allotment is gone. One pass has to do. Even so, moments of grace sneak in. A Hungarian section practices a high-fast slash exactly as briefed and discovers the promise inside discipline. A young German pilot remembers to jettison both tanks before a break and feels the roll rate return in time to save his life. An old hand chooses to extend instead of turn and comes home mad. But homed on a wind-torn afternoon, the captured Mustang lines up with a crosswind that would make a saint swear. The landing is ordinary, which is the point. An airplane that is predictable when fear is loud is an airplane that manufactures second chances. After shutdown, the pilot sits on the wing and answers questions about mixture settings, about cooling doors in a climb, about when to stop believing you can catch it. He keeps saying the same word. Earlier, if the Circus carries a thesis, it isn't that the Mustang is unbeatable. It's that it is relentlessly well matched to the war it fights. It translates fuel into reach, reach into presence, presence into pressure. It makes bomber escort a promise kept, and it makes interception a gamble played under escort's eyes. It forgives pilot fatigue just enough to turn average into adequate and good into lethal. As winter closes its fist, the Circus thins. Schedules slip, airfields move, the map unravels. The yellow-tailed demonstrator that taught so much becomes a rumor at last light. Lost to a crater, a mishap, or the paperwork black hole that eats the end of wars. What remains isn't the airframe. It's the syllabus it wrote in the sky. Oh, tell me this. Standing at the edge of that runway, which lesson would you tattoo on the inside of your eyelids? Spend height, refuse the horizontal, break contact earlier than your pride will allow, or treat maintenance minutes like weapons? Drop your answer in the comments and make the case that will convince another pilot across time that if this chapter earned your watch to the end, press like so it reaches the next history nerd in the queue, and subscribe to keep this series flying long and high. Your questions steer the next sortie. Leave them below, and I'll build the next episode around the myth you most want proven or broken. The traveling show does something rare in war. It turns fear into fluency. At first, pilots watch the Mustang as a threat wearing borrowed colors. After a morning of walkarounds, cockpit time, and a flight that draws clean shapes on the winter air, they begin to watch it as a system they can predict. Predictability is not comfort. It is leverage. Instructors lean into that leverage. They build if-then habits that fit inside seconds. If it accelerates away, don't donate hope to the chase. Climb and reset. If it drags you low and level, you're already losing. Break contact with intent, not apology. If you must turn, choose altitude first and angle second. Geometry beats gallantry. Write it on the board. Write it in muscle memory. Write it where panic can still read that a day arrives when the Circus brings two enemy machines, the yellow-tailed Mustang and a heavy bomber with a spine of spars like a cathedral. Crews file through the bomber's belly and realize interception is no longer a lesson about a single merge. It's a campaign fought under an umbrella that doesn't fold. Outside, the Mustang keeps time overhead like a metronome of presence. The lesson is not loud. It is relentless. Engineers turn experience into paper. Reports stack up, control gradients that remain linear at speed, climb schedules that keep coolant temperatures honest, fuel management sequences that make endurance a procedure rather than a prayer. The laminar wing ideal, imperfect in the wild, still cheats drag enough to make a map feel smaller. The supercharger's two-step lungs keep power where air thins. Add those truths together, and a bomber stream arrives with guardians both outbound and homebound. The window closes and never reopens. At AT unit level, the culture bends. Briefings stop treating luck like a tactic. Surprise becomes something you plan, not something you beg for. Veterans edit the young with sentences that begin, "If you see this, do that." The new rules are not romantic. They are survivable. When someone asks, "What's the trick?" the room answers in chorus, "Earlier." Not every audience takes it well. A base that has burned through too many leaders listens in brittle silence. They want a miracle. The Circus offers a method. You can feel the friction between those two things. And yet, the method works in ways that don't fit headlines. A young wingman remembers to dump both tanks before a break and finds a roll rate he needs. A section commits to a high, fast slash and refuses the second pass, denying the old greed that killed the last two who tried it. A veteran swallows pride and extends at the first whiff of disadvantage, then lives to be annoyed about it. On a chart, these are small movements. In lives, they are everything. Mechanics keep their own score. They measure the day in minutes saved, cowls that hinge cleanly, filters that don't demand contortions, lines that can be traced without losing a hand to sheet metal teeth. 10 minutes off of servicing here, 12 off a swap there, one sortie gained by Friday. A week later, that extra sortie is a pilot who learned in the air instead of imagining on the ground. The Mustang does not only fight at the merge. It fights on the ramp by letting crews win back time. The codes on fuselages remain a mess that future archivists will curse. Letters borrowed, numbers misread, airframes misremembered. Inside the confusion, the operational pattern stays sharp. Wherever the circus goes, myths shrink to the size of facts. The 109 slats still gift a tighter, slow circle. The 190 still makes a descending pass feel like a falling axe. But neither can force the fight to stay where they shine if the Mustang pilot keeps faith with energy. Energy is not speed alone. It is options layered across seconds. Outside the lecture tent, the sky keeps inventing tests. A crosswind that smacks at rudders. A ceiling that presses everyone down into ugly air, the kind of cold that turns unloved hands clumsy. The Mustang earns its reputation not by setting records on perfect days, but by remaining itself when the day isn't. That quality, character under constraint, infects the lessons. Don't plan for the day you want. Plan for the day you'll get. Jet noise starts to cut across the edges of the narrative. On certain fields, the future screams overhead in streams of heat and speed. The Me-262 is a promise and a threat, both real. The Circus nods to it and returns to the daily storm. Propeller fighters meeting at altitudes where escorts matter and seconds matter more. The jet proves that Germany can leap. Logistics prove that leaping without landing space changes nothing. Meanwhile, the long-legged shepherd keeps showing up on time. As winter grinds on, the Circus improvises. Fuel is rationed like medicine, so they rehearse on the ground with brutal specificity. Cockpit drills turn into rituals, hands moving through flows until fingers know without eyes. Micro-briefs distill into cards. Enter here, exit here, don't wait for perfect. Pilots practice with engines off and fear turned down. When a thin window in the weather opens, they launch with a plan that fits the whole exactly. Sometimes one circuit is the whole day's school. A good one is enough. News of the yellow-tailed Mustang spreads like contrails. Some call it a traitor of metal, others a teacher in disguise. Either way, it creates a shared vocabulary across units that never met, phrases that translate instantly. Refuse the horizontal. By height. Earlier, if all the Circus did was give scattered pilots the same nouns and verbs, it would still be a weapon. Clarity scales. Then, as happens in wars that are losing, the story ends in fog. The demonstrator that taught those verbs disappears into a crater, or into paperwork that dissolves as offices evacuate, or into the kind of accident every Air Force knows too well. Airplanes don't get elegies. They get rumors and residue. The residue here is 1,000 tiny course corrections embedded in human hands. What remains for us is the shape of a truth. The Mustang's genius isn't an absolute number. It's alignment. It aligns performance with mission, ergonomics with endurance, maintainability with tempo. It turns range into strategy, speed into agency, and cockpit design into fewer bad decisions under stress. It's not that it couldn't be beaten. It's that it refused to be engaged on terms that made beating it probable. And the Circus? It is the antidote to comforting lies. It drags knowledge out of rumor and straps it to a seat. It lets professionals touch the enemy's logic and, in doing so, recalibrate their own. It didn't reverse the tide. Tides don't care about clever. But it taught men to swim with the current they had rather than drown fighting the one they wanted. In a war built on scale, even that is not nothing. If you could stand at the edge of one demonstration, just one, would you choose the low, hard pass that made jackets flap, the vertical climb that drew a straight line in a cloud, the debrief where earlier replaced maybe or the mechanic's quiet nod at a panel that finally opened the right way. Tell me in the comments which moment you'd want to witness and why, and which captured aircraft you want me to put under the same microscope next. If this deep dive held you from first spark to last coal, hit like so it finds more eyes, and subscribe so you don't miss the next sortie. Your questions and theories are the fuel. Drop them below, and I'll chart the next mission around the myth you most want tested in the cold, unforgiving air where history earns its reputation. That be why the time the Circus reaches its last safe airfield. The script is muscle memory. Trucks park nose to tail, canvas peels back, the yellow-tailed Mustang breathes to life, and a dozen pairs of eyes search it for weakness. They don't find a magic trick. They find a pattern. Range that turns maps into options, altitude that turns thin air into a workspace, speed that turns choice into a weapon, and controls that still talk to you when fear tries to shout them down. The demo pilot doesn't sell miracles. He sells margins. He shows how a single disciplined extension denies the enemy a whole page of tactics. He shows how a clean, vertical reentry rights position without wasting bullets. He shows how refusing a bad turn is not cowardice, it is craft. When he lands, the room has fewer myths and more methods. Point one last time. The mechanics take questions. They point to hinges that save minutes, to looms that don't tangle, to panels that open like invitations instead of tests. Turnarounds are tempo. One of them says, and you can see pilots nodding at a truth they don't always get to control. The war is full of circumstances. Maintenance is one of the few levers still in human hands that a final mock fight flies under a lid of low cloud. The 190 dives like a thrown knife, and for a heartbeat you think the old doctrine will win the day. But the Mustang skates out a plane, buys a breath of space with speed, converts that breath into climb, and is suddenly riding over the top with the kind of authority that makes debriefs quiet. Nobody cheers. Professionals watch, absorb, and file the lesson where it will be needed most, in the first second of a bad merge. This is how the Circus ends. Not with certainty, but with clarity. The men who saw it won't all live long enough to use everything they learned. War steals like that, but the pattern sticks. Spend height, not pride. Refuse the horizontal. Break contact earlier than your storybook would like. Treat maintenance minutes as weapons. Believe what the airplane is telling you, not what you wish the sky would allow. And the airplane itself. Strip away the yellow paint and the borrowed letters, and you're left with a design that fit its moment with unnerving precision. It was never about winning the prettiest turn. It was about being there, over the bombers, over the target, over home, long enough to make a promise real. It made the map smaller for one side and the day longer for the other. It turned maybe into still here. When people ask why this matters now, I point them to the cockpit. Good design makes discipline easier. In any era, that's the hinge between average outcomes and extraordinary ones. A gauge where your eye expects it, a control that moves the way your hand believes it should, a system that forgives a tired mistake just enough. These are the quiet revolutions that decide noisy days. That's the legacy that outlives paint and politics that, oh, here's where I hand you the stick. If you had one question to ask the demo pilot who flew both sides of this story, what would it be? Would you ask about the exact cue to abandon the horizontal, the climb schedule that keeps the coolant honest, the roll rate with one tank forgotten, or the single bad habit he saw again and again in mock combat? Drop your question in the comments, and tell me which capture machine you want next under the spotlight. The Thunderbolt in German markings, the Lightning that wore the wrong flag, or a heavyweight bomber that parked beside its enemies and taught tactics by existing. If this episode kept you locked in, hit like so it reaches the next set of curious eyes, and subscribe to keep flying with us through the strangest corners of World War II. Your theories, corrections, and what-ifs fuel the next mission. Leave them below, and I'll build the follow-up around the challenge you most want proven or broken in the unforgiving air where history earns its truth. There's a quiet part of the show that never makes it into official reports. It happens after the engines cool and the chalkboards are wiped. Two pilots sit on a crate in a hangar that smells of oil and cold iron. One with a sleeve full of victories, one with a logbook light enough to flutter. They speak a shared language, angles, Patient small mistakes that grow teeth. The younger one asks, "When do you know you're already losing?" The older one answers without poetry, "When you let the other machine choose your speed." That's the heart of the Mustang lesson. Repeat it until it stops sounding dramatic and starts sounding useful. Don't be dragged into the flat. Don't chase a fleeing tail. Don't stay after you've spent the one advantage you brought to the fight. The airplane in yellow paint doesn't gloat, it demonstrates. It shows how extensions turn fear into distance, how altitude becomes currency you can spend twice, how a roll that stays crisp under load is a kind of insurance policy written in metal. In the workshops, the engineers become translators between feeling and fact. They map what test pilots describe, still talks to you near the edge, doesn't go wooden in the dive, climbs like the air forgot to thin, onto curves and tables. They measure control forces at speed and find linears where others find cliffs. They open the belly and discover that maintenance has been treated as design, not afterthought. Every hinge that opens cleanly is a promise kept to a cold crew at dawn. Outside, the traveling unit keeps moving along roads that are more rumor than route. At each stop, the same choreography, a walk-around that replaces myth with fingerprints. Cockpit time that makes locations of levers feel inevitable. A flight that draws the day's lesson where eyes can't look away. And then the mock fight, where respect replaces swagger and tactics replace superstition. Some bases listen with relief. They needed rules that fit inside seconds, and they get them. Others listen with grief, because experience has taught them a different religion. Duels settled low and level, pride salvaged in a tightening circle. The circus offers an unromantic gospel. Leave earlier, climb sooner. Refuse the geometry that flatters your ego but empties your future. Where allies gather, the message is tailored for their mounts. A briefing chalks the slash of a high, fast pass for those flying stocky fighters built to dive like anvils and climb like clockwork. The notes are short enough to remember with a canopy rattling. Arrive from above, strike once, don't stay to admire, and never donate energy to a second pass that only flatters the opponent's plan. When the lesson works, it feels less like victory and more like a narrow escape earned on purpose. The code stenciled on capture machines continue to confuse the paperwork and clarify the point. A handful of letters and numbers paint certainty on aluminum. Stories later mix them like cards. What doesn't mix is performance. A Mustang remains a Mustang, whether the tail bears stars or crosses. The truth it teaches is indifferent to markings. The bomber demonstration, when the circus can manage it, puts everything into one frame. A great airborne barn hums overhead under a net of escort, and a flight of fighters tries to carve a path through to the target that matters. Once upon a time, they would wait until Guardians went home. Now the Guardians don't leave. The attackers discover that timing is a discipline, not a hope. The Shepherds arrive on time, every time, because their airplane was designed to make punctuality strategic. Back in the lab, a report lands on a desk with findings that are unexcited and devastating. The wing sheds drag, even when the ideal of perfection has been scuffed by weather and war. The engine's two-step lungs keep breath where other machines pant. The layout of controls lowers pilot workload in the hour that makes mistakes, fatigue at altitude, stress under pressure, cold in the bones. None of this is magic. All of it is design meeting doctrine that on a gray afternoon the wind comes across the field in fists. The demonstrator flies anyway within sensibility. Takeoff tidy, pattern neat, landing honest. The point isn't stunt work, it's character. When the air is ugly, the airplane remains itself, and that steadiness migrates into the hands of the men who watched. Later, in the debrief, a single word keeps coming back like a refrain: earlier. Break earlier. Climb earlier. Decide earlier. Pride arrives on time to your funeral. Discipline shows up in time to your next sortie. The circus doesn't hide the places where the local fighters still bite. In the right corner, at the right speed, a slatted wing draws a circle you should respect. From the right altitude, with a clean entry, a diving pass writes its own authority. The lesson isn't to avoid those regimes. It's to visit them by choice, not invitation. If the Mustang tries to sell you the horizontal, don't buy. If it tempts you to chase, let go and cash altitude instead. The men who live longest treat temptation like a trap until proven otherwise. Eventually, the show reaches the last airfield on the last road they trust. The yellow tail glows against the sky, the color of defeat. The pilot flies one more profile with nothing to prove and everything to teach. A level pass that says, "Don't chase this." A climb that says, "You won't take this away." A break and extension that say, "This is how you survive, choosing not to lose today." When he taxis in, there's no applause. There are pencils scratching speeds and angles in the logbooks. What becomes of the demonstrator isn't the lesson the war keeps. Airframes end in craters, in barns, in photographs nobody can quite place. The people keep the patterns. A wingman jettisons both tanks without thinking and finds the roll rate waiting for him. A section refuses the second pass and denies the enemy the only fight he could win. A leader aborts a chase before it becomes a ritual of regret and brings two men home to fly again. These are small victories that never make headlines and absolutely change outcomes. Stand far enough back and the silhouette of the story becomes simple. An aircraft designed for range, altitude, and manageable workload arrived exactly when a strategy needed range, altitude, and manageable workload. It turned escort from a line on a plan into a promise in the sky. It traded showy, turning fights for the quiet arithmetic of being where it mattered for as long as it mattered. It made a map smaller for some and a day longer for others. And the traveling unit that hauled it from field to field, it proved that professionalism survives scarcity. It proved that clarity outruns rumor. It proved that an enemy's strengths can be learned and, in learning, made less mystical and more manageable. It did not reverse a tide. It taught sailors how not to drown quite so quickly. In a season of shortages, that is still a kind of abundance that, let's bring it back to you. Which single habit from this story would you adopt if your life depended on it? Refusing the horizontal, spinning height before hope, breaking contact before pride redraws the map, or treating maintenance minutes like ammunition. Tell me in the comments which lesson you'd carve into the inside of your helmet, and which captured aircraft you want to see dissected next under this same unforgiving light. If this episode kept you hooked to the last line, hit like so it finds the next curious mind, and subscribe to stay with me as we map the strange, revealing edges of World War II aviation. Your questions and what-ifs are the fuel. Drop them below, and I'll plan the next sortie to test the myth you most want proven or broken where the air is thin and the truth is blunt.